Sometimes the real horror isn't in haunted houses or ghostly whispers. It's in the quiet knock at the door, the flicker of movement outside your window, or the realization that someone's been watching you for weeks. These 8 true stories aren't about monsters in the dark. They're about people in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place to terrify you forever. From eerie visitors on country roads to strangers behind kitchen glass, each story digs into that quiet, creeping dread. We all try to ignore the feeling that we're not alone, even when we're supposed to be safe. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1. The Visitor at Hollow Pine Road. I was 14 the October it happened, and even now I still don't know if I imagined parts of it or if someone truly meant to hurt me that night. My name is Jamie Rayner, and back then I lived with my parents and my older brother Lucas in a split-level house tucked into the woods outside Millersfield, Ohio. It was one of those blink-and-you-miss-it towns, the kind with a single gas station, a faded diner, and a church whose bell only rang on Sundays. Our house sat way back on Hollow Pine Road down a gravel driveway, almost a football field, long framed on both sides by thick, overgrown pine trees. They were so tall and dense that you could barely see the house from the road, and once inside, it felt like the rest of the world just disappeared behind all that green. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that you either grow to love or start to fear. I never minded it much. I liked the feeling of being tucked away, of hearing nothing but the wind brushing through the trees at night. Our neighbors were half a mile away and barely visible through the woods, just a pair of elderly retirees who kept to themselves. The air always smelled like pine needles and damp earth, especially in the fall, and our yard would be buried in golden leaves by late October. It was peaceful, isolated, and for a while I thought that was exactly what I wanted. That Friday night, everything felt normal at first. My parents had left that afternoon to attend a cousin's wedding in Pennsylvania, leaving Lucas and me home alone for the weekend. It wasn't the first time they'd trusted us to stay by ourselves, and since Lucas was in 11th grade with his driver's license, they figured we'd be fine. Lucas had plans to hang out at his friend Shane's place that night. Pizza, video games, the usual, and even offered to take me with him. But I declined. I wanted the house to myself. No fighting over the TV, no one rolling their eyes at me. Just quiet. I made a frozen pizza, grabbed a soda, and settled on the living room couch upstairs. The big windows looked out over the front yard, but by night, all they showed was my own reflection, staring back at me in the glass. I watched reruns on Netflix, messaged my friend Lena about a homework assignment, and scrolled through Instagram until the house seemed to fall into this soft, cozy stillness. And then it came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. I froze. Not a doorbell, not a frantic pounding, just 3 heavy knocks that sounded too controlled, too intentional. My first thought was Lucas, but I knew he wouldn't knock. My second thought was a neighbor, but nobody ever used our front porch. Most people came around back by the garage. The front door was more decorative than functional. I waited. Then came 3 more knocks. Louder. Still steady. Still wrong. I didn't move. I just sat there, my body tensed, eyes locked on the dark shape of the front door. My heart had started to beat harder, not in a panicked way yet, but like it knew something I didn't. I waited for a voice, a second knock, a sound of footsteps walking away, but there was nothing. Only the low hum of the television and the soft buzz of the kitchen light. I reached slowly for my phone and crept toward the hallway that led to my bedroom, which was just above the front porch. If I pulled the curtain back the right way, I could sometimes catch a glimpse of whoever was standing outside. I moved quietly, my socks making no sound on the hardwood, and peeked through the window. There was no one there. The porch was empty. The light was on, casting pale yellow across the welcome mat, but there were no shadows, no movement, nothing out of place. I looked further into the yard, down the gravel driveway toward the tree line, but all I saw were outlines of trash bins, the old swing set, and the dark silhouettes of pine trees swaying gently in the breeze. Nothing else. Still, I locked the front door, then the back, then the basement sliding door just in case. I texted Lucas, "Did you tell anyone to come over?" His reply came fast, "No." Why I hesitated, then typed, "Someone knocked," then disappeared. His response, "Creepy. You okay?" I told him I was fine, but I wasn't. Not really. Because just after midnight, as I lay awake listening to the silence, I heard the garage door close. Not open, close. And I knew without a doubt I hadn't imagined that sound. My breath caught as soon as I heard it, and the deep mechanical thud of the garage door settling shut echoed faintly through the house. I sat up in bed, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would drown out any other noise. For a moment I just listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no door opening from the garage into the laundry room, no voice calling out. I grabbed my phone and texted Lucas again, this time faster, my fingers shaking. "Did you just get home?" No reply. I slipped on my hoodie and padded downstairs, avoiding the spots on the floor I knew would creak. When I opened the door to the garage and flipped on the light, I was met with an empty space. No car, no boxes moved, nothing disturbed. Just stillness and cold concrete. Had I imagined it? Maybe. But I didn't think so. It wasn't until nearly 12:40 a.m. that Lucas finally pulled into the driveway. I saw his headlights sweep across the front windows, washing the walls in white before disappearing. I met him at the door, blurting everything out before he'd even set foot inside. The knocks, the garage door, the emptiness. He looked at me like I'd told him I'd seen a ghost. Then his expression shifted, confusion mixed with something I couldn't quite read. "There's a car," he said slowly. "It's parked just past the trees by the road. No lights on, just sitting there." My blood ran cold. "What kind of car?" I asked. "Dark. A sedan, maybe. Couldn't see the plates. I thought someone was broken down, but no one waved. No one got out. They were just there." He stepped outside and aimed his flashlight toward the woods, but the trees were too thick. Whatever was out there was hidden, watching, waiting. Lucas came back inside without saying much, just locked the door behind him and muttered, "Let's stay in the living room tonight." We pulled the heavy curtains shut, turned on every light, and sat together on the couch with the TV playing something neither of us paid attention to. I tried to act like I was okay, like maybe I'd just overreacted, but I could feel it in the way Lucas kept glancing toward the windows, the tightness in his jaw, the way he checked the back door again without saying why. We didn't sleep. Not really. Every sound made us flinch. Every creak of the house felt louder than it should have. When morning finally came and light started pouring in through the slats, we both got up and walked outside. The air was damp with morning fog, and the pine needles on the ground were slick underfoot. We checked the front yard first. Nothing. No footprints on the porch, no marks in the dirt, no tire tracks where Lucas had seen the car. The leaves covering the side of the road were undisturbed, as if no vehicle had ever been there at all. It was like the night had erased itself. We circled the entire property. The swing set was still, the trash bins untouched. Even the garage, where I was sure I'd heard that closing sound, looked exactly as we'd left it. No scuff marks on the floor, no scratches on the lock, no sign of anyone stepping inside. Later that afternoon, our parents came back. We told them everything. They were concerned but tried to play it down, said maybe someone got lost, or maybe it was kids messing around. But no one walks 100 yards up a gravel driveway into the woods just to knock and vanish. No one does that by accident. A few months passed, and winter settled in with its usual silence. The trees lost their leaves, the nights grew longer, and Hollow Pine Road turned into a tunnel of frost and stillness. Life went on. School homework, the usual teenage stuff. But I never really let go of that night. Every time I heard a knock, even from a delivery guy, something in me would freeze for a second. I started keeping my curtains drawn, checking the locks twice before bed, listening for things I shouldn't be hearing. I never forgot the way those knocks sounded, too slow, too steady. Not curious, not friendly. Then one night, just after dinner, Lucas and I were in the kitchen cleaning up when he said something that made my stomach turn. He was drying a plate, not even looking at me when he spoke. "Hey, do you remember that night with the knocks and the car?" I nodded slowly. Of course I remembered. He hesitated. "I didn't tell you everything." I stopped what I was doing. "What do you mean I saw that car?" before he said, voice low. "Twice. Once about a week before that night, and again the day before Mom and Dad left. Same spot, same car. No lights, just sitting there." My skin prickled. "Why didn't you say anything?" I thought it was nothing, he admitted. "Just someone parked. But the second time, I don't know. Got this weird feeling. Like whoever was in there wasn't lost. They were waiting." I stared at him, heart racing all over again. Because suddenly it wasn't just one strange night. It was something planned, something watched, something that almost happened. And now every time I walk past that window, I wonder if they ever came back. If they're still out there waiting. Story 2. Apartment 2B wasn't empty. I moved into apartment 2B in early October, just as the leaves in northern Michigan were starting to turn that burnt orange I'd always loved. I had just turned 26 and needed space from my job, from the city, from people. The breakup hadn't been messy, but it had left me feeling drained and restless, like I'd been holding my breath for months and didn't even realize it. So when I found a cheap one-bedroom in Elmdale, a tiny nowhere town with more gas stations than grocery stores, I signed the lease without thinking twice. The building itself had history, or at least that's what the landlord Greg told me. It used to be a roadside motel back in the 80s when travelers passed through on their way north. After tourism died off, the place was converted into apartments. But it still felt like a motel, narrow hallways buzz from the old lights overhead walls that were too thin for comfort. Still, it was mine. The apartment was small but clean, tucked at the end of the second floor right above the entrance stairwell. I liked how quiet it was. No one ever knocked. No one said hello. At the time, that felt like a blessing. I wasn't looking for company. I just wanted quiet. I had no idea what I was really moving into. It was a Tuesday night when things first felt off. I'd worked a longer shift than usual, handling dispatch problems for the delivery company, and by the time I got home, it was nearly 11. The wind was cutting cold, and the flickering streetlight above my parking spot stuttered like it was about to die. I parked, grabbed my bag, and hurried up the cracked concrete steps, my only thought being how fast I could reheat leftover pasta and crash under my weighted blanket. As soon as I walked into the apartment, I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, kicked off my boots, and headed straight to the kitchen. I was halfway through opening the fridge when I realized I didn't have my phone. I checked my pockets, the counter, even behind the couch. Nothing. It wasn't until I thought back that I realized I probably dropped it in the car. It wasn't the first time. Annoyed, I slipped on my shoes again and left the apartment unlocked. I'd only be gone a minute. Sure enough, the phone had slid between the seat and the center console. I grabbed it and headed back upstairs, phone in hand, and thoughts already drifting to sleep. But the moment I stepped back inside, something shifted. Not visually, not physically, just a feeling thick and heavy, like the air had changed while I was gone. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It just felt wrong. And that's when the silence started to hum. I tried to shake the feeling off, blaming it on exhaustion and the cold that had seeped into my bones. After brushing my teeth and changing into an old hoodie and sweatpants, I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. I left a lamp on in the hallway just outside my door, more out of habit than fear. The room was dim and quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the ceiling as the building settled. I laid there staring at the ceiling body, heavy but mind racing. That strange pressure in the air hadn't left. If anything, it had settled deeper. Then I heard it, a shuffle. Soft, slow, like the sound of a sock dragging lightly across carpet. I sat up instantly, eyes straining against the dark. At first, I told myself it had to be the neighbors, maybe the couple across the hall arguing again. But this sound was closer inside. I held my breath. Silence. Then another shuffle, closer this time. My chest tightened, and every instinct in my body screamed that I was not alone. I reached for my phone and checked the time. 5:42 a.m. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even text. I just slipped out of bed as quiet as I could and crept toward my bedroom door, which was cracked open just enough to see a sliver of the living room beyond. That's when I saw it movement. A figure gliding silently across the space average height, wearing dark clothes, heading toward the front door like he knew where everything was. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He just walked to the door, turned the knob, and left. Calm. Like he belonged there. Like he had done it before. I stood frozen in place, the bedroom door still slightly ajar. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move until I heard the click of the front door closing, followed by a silence so thick it rang in my ears. When I finally stepped into the hallway, every light in the apartment felt too dim, every shadow stretched too far. I checked the lock on the front door first, still intact, though I could have sworn I hadn't left it unlocked. He hadn't fumbled, hadn't tried different keys. He just opened it and walked out. Like he knew exactly how to do it. Gripping a kitchen knife I pulled from the drawer, I walked the apartment room by room. Bathroom, empty, bedroom closet, clear, under the bed, nothing. But when I reached the small coat closet by the entrance, the one I almost never used, I saw something strange. The door was slightly open, just a crack, enough that I could see the edge of my winter boots and the umbrella I hadn't touched in weeks. I opened it slowly, my hand trembling. The closet was empty, or so I thought at first. But on the wooden floor, under the hanging coats, the thin layer of dust had been disturbed. Not just footprints, swirls, smudges, as if someone had been standing there for a long time, waiting, listening. I called the police, then voice shaky but trying to sound steady. An officer came within 15 minutes, scanned the apartment, took my statement. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing stolen. Just an open door and a stranger who'd slipped out like smoke. He said maybe I left the door unlocked. Maybe someone saw an opportunity. But I knew the truth before I ever picked up the phone. He didn't come to steal. He didn't touch a thing. He just came to watch. The officers stayed for about 40 minutes. A man and a woman, both polite but clearly unconvinced that anything serious had happened. They asked me to walk them through it again. What I heard, what I saw, when I left, when I came back. I told them everything right down to the soft shuffle of feet and the way the man moved through my living room like he had memorized every step. They checked the windows, the fire escape, even the basement entry points, but found no evidence of a break-in. The locks weren't damaged, and the deadbolt hadn't been tampered with. When I asked if the door could have been picked, they said probably not. Most likely he just got lucky with an unlocked door. But that didn't sit right with me. The officer's words kept echoing: no forced entry, no signs of theft, nothing missing. They didn't say it outright, but I could feel what they were thinking. And maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was tired, stressed. Maybe the mind fills in gaps when it's too quiet for too long. But as they were leaving, the female officer paused near the coat closet. She didn't say anything. Just glanced down at the smudged floor, then at me. A flicker of understanding passed between us, and I think in that second she knew I wasn't making it up. They told me to call if anything else happened. Gave me a card. Drove off into the dark. I locked the door behind them with shaking hands, knowing deep down that whoever had been inside hadn't just stumbled in. He had planned it, and I was the reason he left empty-handed. For a while after that night, nothing happened. The apartment stayed quiet. Too quiet. I kept the lights on longer than usual. Slept with my phone on my chest, the lock screen glowing faintly beside me. Every creak of the floor above made me sit up. Every gust of wind against the window made my breath hitch. I bought a door jammer. Changed the locks, even though the landlord said it wasn't necessary. I stopped using the coat closet altogether. For a while, I convinced myself it had just been a fluke. Someone saw an open door and slipped in, got spooked when I came back. A close call, but over. Then one morning, a few weeks later, I was scrolling through local news while eating cereal on the couch. A headline caught my eye. Security camera footage leads to arrest in nearby town. Curious, I clicked on the article. The image was blurry, taken from a grainy gas station camera late at night. But my spoon stopped halfway to my mouth when I saw it. The man, or at least I was pretty sure it was him. Same build, same posture, dark hoodie. The image showed him standing near the back of a car parked at the edge of the lot. What made my stomach turn, though, was the direction he was facing. Not the gas station. Not the road. He was staring directly at the camera, right into it, as if he knew it was there, as if he wanted to be seen. I zoomed in, but the image pixelated into noise. The article didn't give a name, just said the man had been trespassing, possibly casing properties in the area. They never confirmed if he was connected to my case. But I knew. I knew those eyes. And I knew that night in apartment 2B was not the first time he had watched me. Story 3. The Man in the Shed. I was 30 when I bought the house, a 2-bedroom fixer-upper nestled on a few acres of land in upstate Maine, about an hour from the nearest real town. After a decade of non-stop construction work and bouncing between rentals, I was ready for something mine. The listing called it rustic, which was a polite way of saying it was old drafty and needed a lot of elbow grease, but that didn't bother me. It had charm. A front porch that wrapped around halfway, a gravel driveway lined with trees, and a shed out back big enough to hold all my tools and gear. More importantly, it had space. No neighbors right on top of you. Just one older guy named Jerry about half a mile down the road who waved when he saw you, but mostly kept to himself. I liked that. I wasn't antisocial, just tired of noise, tired of traffic, of paper-thin apartment walls, of people always being too close. I did seasonal contracting work now, cabinetry trim, smaller remodels, so winters were usually mine to do as I pleased. That fall, I spent my afternoons outside, wrapping up final chores before the cold truly hit. Clearing the yard, moving equipment into the shed, locking down anything the wind might carry. The days were quiet, the kind of quiet that seeps into your bones. No sirens, no voices, just the occasional rustle of leaves or a distant bird call. I didn't miss the city, not one bit. Out here, I finally felt like I could breathe. Until one afternoon, something small shifted, and I started to realize I might not be alone. It was late October, the kind of day where the sky hangs low and gray, and the air smells like wood smoke and damp leaves. I'd just finished moving the last of the heavier tools into the shed mower weed trimmer bags of fertilizer, and was double-checking the locks when I spotted something that made me pause. A man was walking down the road in the distance, moving slowly along the gravel shoulder like he didn't have anywhere particular to be. That alone wasn't too strange, but something about it felt off. This wasn't a road you just wandered down. It didn't connect to anything but more trees, and most of the people who lived out here drove. He wasn't carrying a bag, no coat, no water bottle, just a light sweatshirt and jeans hands stuffed in his pockets, head down. I stood still, one hand resting on the gas can I'd just finished refilling, and watched him. He didn't look my way, didn't even glance at the house, just kept walking his steps, steady and unhurried. I thought maybe he was from one of the houses a mile or two down the road. Maybe someone new, but I didn't recognize him, and I'm the kind of guy who notices when someone new shows up out here. He passed the driveway and kept going. I waited until he was out of view, then looked both ways down the road. No parked cars, no bike, just silence. I told myself it was nothing, but the feeling didn't leave. Not that night. Not for a while. That evening, the temperature dropped fast. The wind picked up and whistled through the trees like it was searching for something. I made a pot of chili, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat at the small kitchen table that looked out over the backyard. From where I sat, I could just barely see the corner of the shed through the window, its shape half-shadowed beneath the security light over the porch. Everything looked still. Normal. I flipped through a book and tried to forget the man on the road. By the time I stood up to wash the dishes, the sun was gone and the windows were dark. Just as I reached to turn off the kitchen light, I heard it, a deep, solid thud. Not from the house, not a creak or a pipe or the usual old home groan. It came from outside. I froze. Another thud followed, dull and wooden, like something striking the side of the shed. I moved to the window, heart already starting to thump in my chest. The shed door was wide open. That door was heavy, solid oak, built to last, and the latch wasn't the kind that just popped open with a breeze. I always checked it, always secured it tight. I stood there for a long second, unsure if I should grab a flashlight or my rifle. I did both. The flashlight was in the junk drawer. The rifle I kept in the hallway closet, loaded this time of year in case of coyotes, or worse. I threw on my boots, flicked off the safety, and stepped outside into the cold. The wind hit me first, then the silence. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound, but the shed stood open like it had been waiting for me to come check. I crossed the yard slowly, the cold biting at my face boots, crunching through dead leaves and brittle grass. My flashlight beam jittered with each step, dancing across tree trunks and the side of the shed. I called out once, just a simple, "Anyone in there?" But the words felt hollow in the night. No answer. The closer I got, the more I realized how wrong it all felt. The wind had died down, and the air was too still. When I reached the shed, I gripped the rifle tight in one hand and swung the flashlight around inside. Nothing. At first glance, everything looked the same. The mower was where I left it. Toolboxes stacked in the corner, shelves untouched. But as I stepped inside, my boots landed in something wet. I tilted the flashlight down. Muddy footprints. Clear human prints tracked across the concrete floor, leading from just inside the doorway toward the back wall. I followed them, slowly, pulse rising with each step. They stopped near the shelves and just ended. No sign of someone hiding, no scuff marks from turning around. Just a line of prints that faded into nothing. I checked behind everything's stacked bins, the tall cabinet, even the loft storage space overhead. No one. But the prints hadn't been there earlier, I was sure of it. And they weren't mine. The treads were different, narrower, lighter. I backed out of the shed and shut the door hard, relatching it with more force than I meant to. Then I kicked the base to make sure it held. It did. I stood there for a moment, flashlight scanning the trees around the yard. Nothing moved. But that feeling returned, that crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I didn't wait around to find out. I went straight back inside. And this time, I locked the door behind me. Twice. I stood in the hallway for a long time after I locked the door, rifle still in my hands, listening. The heater kicked on. Pipes groaned. But nothing else. I turned on every light in the house, checked every window, every door, even the crawl space hatch in the laundry room. Everything was locked. Everything was quiet. I told myself the footprints were old, somehow missed before, that the wind had blown the door open, even though I knew it couldn't. Eventually, I sat back down at the kitchen table, trying to calm my nerves with the rest of the bourbon. But my eyes kept drifting to the backyard. Around midnight, I finally decided to call it. I shut off the lights and went to bed, rifle propped against the nightstand. I woke to the sound of the front door creaking. Not banging, not kicking, just slow, intentional movement. I shot out of bed, heart hammering. The hallway was pitch black, but I could hear the floorboard's soft steps, one after the other. I grabbed the rifle and moved slowly toward the noise, bare feet, silent on the hardwood. At the end of the hall, just outside the guest bedroom, I saw him. A man pale and gaunt, wearing a dirt-smudged hoodie, holding a shovel. He hadn't heard me yet. He was mid-step, turning toward the hall when I shouted, "Don't move." He froze, the shovel still raised in his grip, his eyes wide, lips trembling. For one terrible second, we just stared at each other. Then I said it again, louder this time. Put it down, he didn't. But he didn't come closer either. Finally, with a sharp breath, he dropped the shovel. It clanged against the floor loud as thunder. And just like that, he bolted, racing back into the guest room and diving through the open window. Gone. I rushed to the window just in time to see him vanish into the field behind the house, a dark shape swallowed by taller grass and shadows. I aimed the rifle, but didn't fire. My hands were shaking too much. And something deep in my gut told me that pulling the trigger wouldn't bring me any comfort. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and dragged a dresser in front of the guest room door. Then I did the same with the front and back doors, pushing tables and chairs against them, like it was going to stop him if he came back. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. Just sat in the living room, eyes fixed on the backyard, waiting for another shape to appear. The police came over 2 hours later. They brought dogs in the morning, but the trail disappeared at the tree line. No prints, no ID, nothing left behind. But that shovel, it was old and rusty, the kind you'd find buried in the back of a shed. And the blade had a fresh nick in it, like it had hit something hard recently. I spent the next few days putting up security lights, new locks, even nailed the shed door shut. While clearing out the guest room, I came across a box I hadn't touched since I moved in, old files from the previous owner's stuff I meant to throw out. At the bottom was a folded newspaper clipping from 5 years earlier. It was about a missing man, local drifter, pale mid-30s, described as unstable. Last seen near this area. There was a photo, same hoodie, same face. I dropped the article and backed away, heart pounding all over again. I hadn't just been broken into. I had been watched. And I still don't know how long he was in that house before I saw the footprints. Story 4. Knock knock for the Lamberts. It was the first week of June, just a few days after high school graduation, and I was 18 with absolutely no plans. No job lined up, no summer classes, just the hazy, weightless stretch of time before college started in the fall. My parents had left for their annual trip to Iowa to visit my aunt and uncle, something they did every summer. Usually I tagged along, but this year I told them I wanted to stay home. I made it sound like I needed the time to think, to plan my future. Really, I just wanted the freedom. A few days alone in the house, eating junk, playing video games, and binge watching shows without anyone telling me to turn off the lights or clean up after myself. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside of Elmridge, Missouri, safe, boring, familiar. I'd lived there my whole life. It was the kind of place where people waved to each other at stop signs and left their porch lights on, out of habit, not necessity. The weather had been warm during the day and cool at night, perfect for sleeping with the windows cracked just a bit. That Thursday evening, I was curled up on the couch with leftover pizza, a blanket, and a Netflix rewatch playing in the background. It was peaceful, easy. I wasn't scared, not even a little. But that was before the knock. It was close to 11:30 p.m. when I first heard the knock. Not a frantic pounding or a timid tap, just a solid, deliberate knock-knock firm enough to cut through the sound of the TV. I froze pizza crust halfway to my mouth. Nobody ever knocked on our door that late. My parents had always told me not to answer the door after dark, and I'd never had a reason to question that rule until now. Slowly, I muted the TV and crept toward the front door, careful not to let the wooden floorboards creak under my feet. Our porch light was off, but the glow from the hallway cast just enough illumination for me to peek through the peephole. There were two men standing there. Both looked to be in their 40s or 50s, one with a bald head and the other with a short beard. They were wearing matching gray hoodies, the kind that could blend into any crowd. Neither of them smiled. They weren't holding packages. They weren't dressed like delivery drivers or salesmen. They just stood there shoulder to shoulder like they'd done this before. Then one of them spoke low and clear. "We're here to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Lambert." My heart skipped. That was my parents' last name. It wasn't on the mailbox. It wasn't on a sign. But they knew it. I didn't answer. I didn't make a sound. The two men stood silently for another few seconds. Then the bearded one leaned toward the other and whispered something I couldn't make out. Without knocking again, they both turned and walked off the porch. I waited for the sound of a car engine, headlights, anything. But nothing came. They hadn't left. Not really. I could feel it. Something about the way they moved told me they weren't finished. I stayed crouched behind the couch for what felt like forever, my eyes locked on the front door, waiting to hear tires on pavement or even the creak of someone walking away. But the neighborhood stayed quiet, eerily so. No car started, no engine hummed, just silence. 5 minutes passed, maybe less. And then I heard it, the soft, unmistakable squeak of the backyard gate. My stomach dropped. That gate was old and always stuck a little, so it made a high metallic groan whenever it moved. I scrambled on all fours toward the back window, keeping low heart racing. I peeked through the curtain just enough to see them both men, now walking slowly across the yard, side by side like they were casing the place. Their heads moved in sync, scanning the house like they were looking for shadows in the windows. Then they stopped at the back door. I backed away instantly, panic rising in my throat. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table and bolted for the garage, slamming the interior door behind me and locking it with trembling hands. I crouched behind my dad's tool bench and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that 2 men were trying to break in. She asked if I was safe. I told her yes for now. Then I heard it. A dull crack like wood splitting. The back door had given way, and just like that, they were inside. Confident footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor, slow and deliberate. Not the steps of someone rushing, the steps of someone who believed they had time. I stayed hidden behind the tool bench, barely breathing, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The dispatcher stayed on the line, her voice calm but firm, asking me to keep whispering anything I heard. The footsteps moved through the kitchen, then paused. I could hear the fridge open, the quiet creak of the door, the clinking of bottles being shifted. Then one of the men spoke, his voice, muffled but clear enough. "No bags here." The other replied, "Maybe the kid stayed behind." My blood ran cold. They knew someone was home. They weren't guessing. They were sure. Footsteps moved toward the stairs. I heard doors open, slam, then open again. They were checking every room, hunting. I pressed myself tighter into the corner, trying to disappear into the tools and dust, trying to breathe without making a sound. Time stopped. Minutes felt like hours. Then finally, salvation came. The cruiser's headlights swept across the slats in the garage door. Red and blue lights flashed into the shadows, and I heard the dispatcher say, "Officers are outside. Stay hidden. They're coming in now." A moment later, yelling. Police hands in the air, a crash. A door kicked in, the sound of someone running, furniture being overturned, more shouting. Then silence. A knock on the garage door made me flinch hard. "Police," a man called out. "Are you in there?" I unlocked the door with shaking fingers. An officer helped me outside, his hand on my back, asking if I was hurt. I just nodded and kept whispering the same thing. They were looking for my parents. They knew our name. They knew everything. It took the police nearly 10 minutes to get both men into cuffs. They found one hiding in my parents' bedroom closet, the other crouched behind the living room couch. Neither resisted. Neither spoke. Just silent, cold compliance. I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket one of the officers gave me, trying to make my hands stop shaking. The paramedics checked me over, but I wasn't hurt, at least not physically. My parents arrived the next morning in a panic, having driven straight through the night. My mom hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, and my dad kept pacing the living room, staring at the broken back door like he could will it to make sense. The detectives questioned me for hours. They found zip ties and folding knives on both men. Their IDs turned out to be fake. No fingerprints in the system, no criminal records they could trace. Nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. The police couldn't figure out why they had come. Nothing was stolen. No electronics, no cash, not even the jewelry in the upstairs bedroom. It wasn't a robbery. It was something else. Something more personal. They believed the men might have been planning to wait for my parents to return. That thought haunted me, the idea that I was just an inconvenience, a loose thread in a larger plan. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every knock at the door made my stomach twist. I kept the lights on all night, installed cameras, reinforced locks. But I never got an answer. They made bail and vanished. No explanation, no confession, just silence. About a month after everything happened, once the door was replaced and the locks upgraded, life started to settle, at least on the surface. My parents were still rattled, and I could tell they watched me closer, like I might suddenly shatter. I tried to go back to normal too, but something inside me had shifted. I jumped at the sound of the mail slot, slept with a baseball bat under the bed. And every time I walked past the back door, I remembered how easily it had given way. One rainy afternoon, I was helping my dad clean out the old desk in his study. It had become a catch-all for random papers and junk, and neither of us had touched it since the break-in. As I pulled open the bottom drawer, I noticed something jammed in the very back, a black leather notebook. It wasn't mine. I opened it slowly, flipping through the first few pages. My breath caught. It was filled with personal notes, our names, our schedules, my dad's work travel dates, my mom's yoga class times, even mine after-school shifts, the bus schedule from last year, notes about me sometimes walking home alone. Where did this come from? I asked. My dad stared at it and then shook his head. I've never seen that before. Neither had my mom. We called the detectives. They took the notebook, but never confirmed anything. All I knew was someone had been watching us, and worse, they'd been inside long before they knocked. Story 5, Belleview Lane. The rental. I booked the rental on a whim. After a brutal stretch of long hours at the office, a messy team restructuring, and the kind of sleep deprivation that turns days into blurs, I needed a break. Something quiet. Simple. My older brother Jordan lived 6 hours away in a small city surrounded by farmland and rolling hills, and I figured a visit would do me good. But his apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom with barely enough space for himself, so I found a rental house nearby instead. It was a plain one-story place in a quiet cul-de-sac, just 10 minutes from his building. The photos showed a clean, well-lit interior, minimal decor, a small fenced yard. Nothing fancy, but perfect for what I needed. I arrived on a Tuesday morning, exhausted but relieved. The neighborhood looked pulled from a brochure, identical houses with manicured lawns and empty sidewalks. The rental had a keypad lock, a tiny porch, and an unnervingly quiet vibe. I dropped my bag inside, grabbed lunch with Jordan, then swung by the grocery store for a week's worth of food. When I got back that evening, the air inside felt cooler than expected. The AC must have been running all day. I adjusted the thermostat, threw together a quick dinner, and collapsed onto the couch. For the first time in months, it felt like I could finally rest. But something in that house had other plans. That first night, I tried to settle in. I watched some mindless TV, answered a few texts, and then turned in early. The bedroom was plain, just a queen-sized bed, 2 small nightstands, and a ceiling fan that creaked slightly when it spun. I left the window cracked for the breeze and pulled the covers up, hoping the silence would lull me to sleep. But even with my body heavy from travel, I couldn't relax. Every sound in the house seemed too sharp, too specific. The compressor in the fridge kicked on with a metallic clunk that made me sit up straight. The floor in the hallway creaked once, just once, but with no one walking on it. I chalked it up to old construction and tired nerves. At around 2:00 a.m., I woke up in a cold sweat. The air felt wrong, heavier somehow. The light on the thermostat was glowing faintly in the hallway. And when I checked it, the setting had changed down to 66. I was sure I had adjusted it earlier. Still groggy, I turned it back up and checked the front door for good measure. It was locked, the deadbolt solid. I returned to bed, pulled the covers tighter, and told myself it was just travel stress messing with my head. But even as I drifted back to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house hadn't been empty when I got back. It had just been waiting, watching, holding its breath. I woke up again sometime after 4 a.m., unsure of what had stirred me. The house was silent, still wrapped in that eerie, early morning darkness where nothing feels real. I didn't hear anything at first, no footsteps, no creaking floorboards, but there was a tension in the air that made my skin crawl. I lay still for a moment listening. Then I noticed a faint breeze brushing across my face. It wasn't coming from the cracked window. It felt different, cooler, like air moving through a larger space. I sat up and looked toward the bedroom door. It was open wider than I remembered. Not all the way. Just slightly more ajar. A few inches enough to see through the gap and catch a glimpse of the hallway. The light I'd left on had been turned off. The hallway was dark. I got out of bed slowly, heart thudding, and crept to the door. My bare feet were silent against the hardwood. As I reached the frame and leaned out to look, a jolt ran through me. The front door was open. Not wide, not swinging, just cracked. Barely. Maybe 2 inches. But enough. I was sure, absolutely sure, I had locked it the night before. I approached slowly, every part of me tense, checking the rooms along the way. Nothing looked disturbed, no drawers open, no windows broken. Just that damn door sitting slightly ajar, like someone had forgotten to finish closing it. Or like someone had slipped inside and then back out again, without a trace. I locked the door again this time, double-checking the deadbolt and jamming a chair beneath the handle like I'd seen in movies. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the couch with the lights on, heart pounding every time the house made a sound, pipes settling the wind, brushing against the windows, the fridge humming to life. Morning came eventually, and with it a sense of strange normalcy. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, and the house looked perfectly ordinary again, like none of it had happened. I told myself maybe I hadn't locked the door as securely as I thought. Maybe I was just exhausted. I spent most of the day with Jordan, trying not to mention what had happened. He'd worry, and I didn't want to ruin the trip. By the time I got back to the rental that night around 8:30, the house felt the same as before. Cool, still, and too quiet. I walked through every room, checking every window, every door. Everything looked untouched. I made a cup of tea, put on a movie, and told myself I was fine. At 12:17 a.m., as I was brushing my teeth, I heard running footsteps. Not outside, inside. Fast, heavy, charging down the hallway. I barely had time to turn before a man tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black, rushed past the bathroom and slammed the bedroom door shut behind him. I froze. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I could hear him in the living room, tearing through drawers, cabinets, furniture, crashing to the floor. Then just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. A moment later, the front door opened. Closed. He was gone. But he had been inside. Again. And this time, I had seen his face. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag phone and keys and walked out the front door without turning off a single light. I drove straight to a hotel downtown and checked in using my credit card without hesitation. The adrenaline was still pumping through me, my hands trembling as I handed over my ID. I locked myself in that room, sat on the bed, and called Jordan. This time I told him everything, the door, the footsteps, the man. He wanted to come over immediately, but I told him not to. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't feel like it was holding its breath. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I called the number the rental had been listed under. A man named Terry answered. He sounded polite, concerned even. I told him there had been 2 break-ins. I expected him to argue or shrug it off, but instead there was a long pause. "That's not possible," he said. "No one should have access but me. Are you sure you had the right code?" "I used the one you gave me," I said. "Is this your house?" Another pause. "I manage the listing," he said. "The property belongs to a friend. He hasn't lived there in a while." Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. I pressed further, and eventually he admitted something that made the bottom drop out of my world. The real owner hadn't been heard from in over a year. There was no forwarding address, no sign of where he'd gone, just stopped returning calls. The house had been sitting there, empty, or at least it was supposed to be. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time, understanding all at once that I hadn't been alone since the day I arrived. I returned to the house just once to collect the rest of my things. Jordan came with me. It was early afternoon, the sun was out, and the street looked deceptively peaceful, like nothing had ever happened. But stepping inside made my skin crawl. The lights were still on just as I'd left them. The air felt stale heavy, like it hadn't moved in days. Nothing appeared to be missing, but the place was a mess. Couch cushions torn off, kitchen drawers wide open, a shattered coffee mug on the floor near the TV stand. It didn't look like someone had broken in to steal. Looked like someone had been looking for something, desperately. I packed my bag quickly, while Jordan walked the house one room at a time, keeping an eye on the hallway. When I stepped into the bedroom to grab my shoes, I paused. The closet door, which I had closed before leaving, was now open an inch, just wide enough to see the shadowed outline of my hanging clothes. I didn't check it. I didn't want to. I just walked away. We left without saying a word, locked the door, and I never looked back. I emailed Terry later that evening to tell him I was out. He didn't respond. The police took my report but never followed up. No leads, no suspects, no signs of forced entry, just a vague warning to be cautious when renting properties online. To this day, I don't know what that man was searching for. But what still keeps me up at night, long after the locks and lights and alarms, is the thought that maybe I had walked past him that first day. Maybe he had been there the entire time, tucked behind a door or crouched in a closet. Waiting, watching, deciding. Story 6. Clover's empty yard. When I moved to Ridgeland, I was looking for peace. After 2 years of picking up the pieces from a toxic relationship and the loss of my childhood dog Clover, I wanted stillness more than anything. The town was small, nestled in northern Michigan, lined with crooked sidewalks and quiet streets that always seemed dusted with fallen leaves, no matter the season. I found a modest, one-story house on the corner of a quiet block. Nothing special, just enough for me, and at the time, Clover. She'd passed 4 months before I moved in cancer, taking her quicker than I could process. Even after all that time, I still found myself checking the back door before bed, expecting to let her in, listening for her nails on the hardwood. Old habits, I guess. I worked from home as a freelance editor, which meant I had long stretches of silence, just me, the hum of my laptop, and the occasional rustle of trees outside my office window. The house backed up to a small yard, fenced in with a single motion sensor floodlight and an old oak tree that creaked during storms. It was exactly what I thought I needed: quiet, contained, forgettable. But the kind of quiet I found there wasn't comforting. It was the kind that makes you hear too much, the kind that listens back. It was late November when it happened, just after Thanksgiving. Riglund was already buried under a layer of snow, the kind that muted every sound and made even footsteps feel distant. That night had been uneventful. I'd microwaved leftover stuffing, edited a batch of transcripts, and curled up in bed with forensic files playing low on the TV. My bedroom sat toward the back of the house with a window that looked out onto the yard. The motion sensor floodlight outside had a soft yellow glow that bled through the blinds whenever something tripped at usually squirrels or wind-blown branches. That night, the light flicked on around midnight, and I barely noticed. Then came the sound. A light tapping, not loud, just intentional. A small, sharp click like someone gently tapping a fingernail or a pebble against the glass. I muted the TV and held my breath. For a second, I thought maybe it was ice cracking or a falling branch. But then it came again, followed by something worse. Crunch, not snow, not a branch. It was the unmistakable sound of a boot stepping onto the wooden deck just outside the window. Slow, heavy, my pulse spiked. I sat up listening hard, willing myself to hear something else, anything else. But the night held its breath along with me. The floodlight still glowed behind the blinds, casting faint shadows on the walls. Someone was out there, and they weren't moving away. They were waiting. I didn't move at first. I just sat there frozen, straining to hear past the sound of my own heartbeat. The crunching stopped, but the light outside stayed on, casting that faint yellow glow through the cracks in the blinds. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a delivery guy lost in the dark, maybe someone mistaking the house. But even that didn't make sense. Who shows up at midnight, walking through snow into someone's backyard without knocking at the front? Then came the sound that shattered any illusion of safety. Glass. Breaking. It wasn't loud, but sharp and sudden, like a window cracking under pressure. I knew instantly where it came from: the dining room. Just a few feet from the back door. The sound of tiny shards hitting tile. I jumped out of bed, heart thundering, and slammed my bedroom door shut. My hand shook as I twisted the lock of flimsy brass latch that suddenly felt like paper. My mind scrambled for logic, but the noise didn't stop. I heard a low creak as the floor near the back door shifted under weight. Then silence again. I scanned the room for my phone and found it tangled in the blanket. I nearly dropped it as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but I could barely answer her questions. "There's someone in my house," I whispered. "They broke the window. I'm in my bedroom. Please hurry." She told me to stay quiet, to stay put, that officers were on the way. But all I could do was stare at the door and wonder if it would hold. I crouched beside the bed phone, pressed tight to my ear, every muscle in my body coiled and trembling. The dispatcher spoke in a steady voice, asking me to describe the layout of the house, whether I could still hear movement. I listened, barely breathing. For a minute, there was only silence. No creaks, no footsteps, just the distant hum of my refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then suddenly, something scraped across the dining room floor. Not glass, wood. As if someone was dragging a chair slowly out of their way. "They're still inside," I whispered. "Stay quiet. Officers are pulling up now," the dispatcher said. I held my breath. Then from outside, the sharp flash of red and blue lights lit up the bedroom ceiling. Tires crunched in the snow, doors slammed. A voice boomed from the front yard. "Police, come out with your hands where we can see them." Another pause. Then a crash. The sound of someone bolting through the house, heavy boots thudding toward the front. I heard another shout closer this time. Then a scuffle. Wood splintering. A body hitting the floor. Seconds later, an officer called out from the hallway. "Ma'am, it's safe now. You can open the door." I unlocked it with shaking hands and stepped out into the light. 3 officers stood near the shattered dining room window. One of them was cuffing a man in a dark hoodie, face pale, eyes blank. "He wasn't trying to steal anything," one officer murmured. "Just standing in the yard, watching." After that night, everything changed. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Even after the window was replaced and the broken glass swept up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been violated, something deeper than just a lock or a wall. I installed a new alarm system, added deadbolts to every door, motion detectors in the hallway, even a camera facing the backyard. But none of it made me feel safe. Not really. I found myself checking the closet before bed, wedging a chair under the doorknob like it was second nature. I stopped leaving windows open even during the day. The police said the man had no record, no ID on him. He hadn't taken anything, hadn't spoken a word, just stood there in the dark and waited. They said it was likely a one-off, someone drifting through, mentally unstable. But I knew better. He'd chosen this house, chosen that window, that yard. Maybe he'd watched for days, weeks, maybe longer. I stopped working from home, started going into town just to be around people, even if it meant sitting in a coffee shop pretending to type. Nights were the worst. The silence I once craved now felt like a threat. The creak of the old oak tree outside made me flinch every time. And even though Clover was gone sometimes at night, I swore I could hear her growl, low, steady, from the place she used to sleep. Like she was warning me. Like she still knew something I didn't. 2 weeks after the break-in, I received a padded envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name printed in shaky block letters across the front. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, every instinct screaming not to. Inside was a cheap flash drive and a single photograph, an old one slightly warped from moisture. It was a picture of me in my backyard, sitting on the steps with a cup of tea, staring off into the trees. I didn't remember it being taken. I didn't remember anyone else being there. Hands trembling, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, half expecting it to be blank or corrupted. But it opened to a folder labeled Watch. Inside were dozens of video files. Grainy, low-quality footage, all taken from different angles of my house. Some through the blinds, some through the crack beneath the back gate. One was from inside the house, pointed directly at my bed. Each clip had a timestamp. The earliest was over 3 weeks before the night he broke in. He'd been watching me, recording me, studying every habit, every movement. I turned the laptop off and sat in the silence, nausea rising in my chest. The man hadn't just chosen my house at random. He had been inside more than once, and he hadn't been after anything. He'd been preparing for something. And even though he was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't finished. Just waiting for the next moment, I let my guard down. Story 7. The Masked Man Returns. Brenfield was the kind of place people forgot existed, tucked between rolling hills and quiet woods. A town where the gas station clerk knew your name, and the library still used paper cards. I moved there 2 years ago after the city chewed me up and spat me out. Burnout, a breakup, and a nervous breakdown in quick succession left me craving silence. Brenfield offered exactly that. I rented a small cabin at the edge of town, surrounded by trees, and far enough off the main road that most nights the only sounds were wind and the occasional owl. I worked remotely as a copy editor, rarely left the house, and kept to myself. The town respected that. People nodded politely, but didn't pry. It was peaceful, almost unnervingly so. but I needed it. After what happened in Chicago, the masked man who followed me for 3 months, who left notes on my windshield and voicemails from untraceable numbers, I needed to disappear. And I thought I had. No one knew where I'd gone. I changed my number, deleted all social media, even filed a legal name change. So when the package arrived on my porch one foggy morning, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with no return address, my hands went cold. I hadn't told anyone where I lived. No one. But someone had found me. Again. I brought the package inside with stiff fingers, every instinct screaming to throw it away, to burn it, to pretend I'd never seen it. But I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after Chicago. I set it on the kitchen table, stared at it for a full minute, then carefully peeled the paper back. Inside was a plain cardboard box taped shut, and when I opened it, I froze. Sitting on top of a bed of tissue paper was the mask. The same mask he used to wear. A blank, expressionless face made of cheap plastic. Off-white with smooth, rounded features. No mouth. Just 2 dark eye holes that somehow felt like they were staring back at me. I hadn't seen it in nearly 2 years, but I knew it instantly. I'd never forget it. I used to wake up screaming from dreams of it, floating at the foot of my bed, peering through windows, resting on my nightstand, even though I'd locked every door. Underneath the mask was a single piece of paper, typed. No signature. It read, "I told you we weren't finished." I dropped it and backed away like it had burned me. My breath caught in my throat, heart slamming in my chest. I checked every lock, every window, every camera. Nothing. Just forest and fog. I had moved across the country, changed everything about my life. But it hadn't mattered. He had found me, and he had brought the mask back with him. That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on in every room, the mask locked in a cabinet under the sink, like that could somehow contain the fear radiating off it. I paced the cabin for hours, checking the windows again and again, expecting to see a figure in the trees. But nothing came. No sound, no shadow. Just the slow crawl of hours until morning. Around 3 to 12 a.m., the motion light above the back porch flicked on. I stopped cold. My breath caught in my throat. The porch was just a few feet from the kitchen window, and I approached it slowly, heart racing. The glass fogged slightly from my breath as I leaned in. At first, I didn't see anything. Just snow settling on the railing and the distant silhouette of trees. Then, movement. A figure darted across the edge of the yard, fast, low, almost crawling. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the kitchen stool. The cameras didn't catch it. He'd stay just outside their range. But I knew it was him. This was his pattern. In Chicago, the first warning was always the mask. Then the stalking started. The near encounters. The deadbolt mysteriously unlocked. Notes inside my car. Always a slow, tightening noose. I called the sheriff's office, voice shaking, but Brenfield wasn't the kind of place that took kindly to paranoia. They said they'd keep an eye out, that I should stay inside. But I already knew he wasn't going to wait long. This was just the beginning. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at the kitchen table with a thermos of black coffee eyes locked on the security monitor I'd installed months ago, but never really needed until now. Every hour or so, I scanned the footage manually, just in case the motion alerts missed something. The yard stayed still. Too still. The trees didn't even sway. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the feed on camera 3 glitched just for a second. A flicker, a horizontal line of static across the bottom. Then it came back. The yard was empty, but something was off. I scrubbed back the footage. That one single frame, showed the faint outline of a man standing at the tree line. Perfectly still, mask on, just outside the infrared's reach. I zoomed in frame by frame until I could see the pale oval of the mask hovering in the dark like a ghost. He hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, just stood there watching. By morning, the snow near the tree line showed footprints. Just a few, but they were fresh. I followed them with my eyes as they trailed off toward the woods and then vanished. He didn't need to break in. He wanted me to know he was close, that the cameras couldn't stop him, that he could be here any time, and I'd never know until he wanted me to. The mask wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The next morning, I drove straight into town, exhausted and wired, clutching a flash drive with the camera footage like it was evidence in a murder trial. I went to the sheriff's office first, showed the deputy the frame with the man at the tree line, explained the context, the history, everything. He watched, nodded, jotted down notes. But there was a hollowness in his expression, like he didn't quite believe me or didn't want to. He promised to send someone out to patrol the area and told me to keep my doors locked. That was it. No urgency. No follow-up. I left feeling worse than before. Next, I stopped by my landlord's office, a local guy named Hank, who'd inherited a handful of properties around Brentfield. I showed him the same clip. At first, he looked annoyed, like I was about to ask for a rent reduction. But as the footage played and the mask came into view, his face went pale. He said nothing for a long time, just stared. Then, almost reluctantly, he muttered, "I think you should find another place to stay for a while." When I pressed him, asked if he knew something, he just shook his head. "He's been here before," Hank said quietly. "Years ago." That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about me. This place had a history. I left Brentfield the next day. No long goodbyes, no note to the landlord. I packed what I could fit in my car, left the rest behind, and drove until the road signs started naming towns I'd never heard of. A week later, I settled in a furnished rental 3 states away. No lease, no paper trail, just cash exchanged through a friend of a friend. The cabin was small but functional, tucked deep in a wooded area with a gravel driveway no one would find unless they were looking. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not even Jordan, my brother. I bought a burner phone, changed email accounts, deleted the old ones. I did everything I had done before and then some. I lived like a ghost. And for a while it worked. I started sleeping again at least a few hours a night. I'd walk through the trees, breathe in the silence, and try to believe I was safe. Weeks passed. The dread faded to a background hum. I told myself maybe this time I'd finally outrun him. Then one morning I opened the front door and stopped cold. A package sat on the porch, same brown paper, same shaky handwriting. My name. Inside, of course, was the mask. No note this time, no message. Just the mask placed neatly in a cardboard box like a gift. But what shook me wasn't the mask itself, it was what was underneath. A photograph. Not of me this time, of Jordan, standing outside his apartment building, smiling, oblivious. He wasn't just watching me anymore. He had expanded the game. And I realized the truth I hadn't wanted to face. You can change your name, your number, your city. But if someone wants to find you badly enough, they will. And when they do, they won't come for you first. They'll come for who you love. Story 8. The Kitchen Window. When I was 9 years old, I spent a lot of nights alone. My mom worked the overnight shift at the hospital, and my dad had left long before I was old enough to remember him. We lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town where the houses were spaced far apart and most of the driveways were gravel. It was safe, or at least that's what Mom always told me. I had a routine homework microwave dinner cartoons until 9, then bed. She'd call around 8:30 every night to check in, her voice always tired but warm, reminding me to lock the doors and leave a light on in the kitchen. I didn't mind being alone. Not really. The house creaked a little when it got cold, and sometimes the wind rattled the windows, but I'd learned to tune it out. What scared me wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was the idea of real people showing up where they didn't belong. That's why I always checked the locks twice and kept the kitchen light on like a beacon. But one night in early November, I was sitting at the table eating macaroni when I noticed something strange. The light above the sink flickered just once. And when I looked up at the window, there was a face watching me from the dark. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, staring at the face behind the glass. It wasn't pressed up close, just far enough back that the porch light didn't quite reach it. I could barely make out the features. Pale skin, dark eyes, no expression, just watching. My body wouldn't move at first. My brain kept trying to tell me it was a trick of the light, maybe my reflection or weird shadow, but I knew better. Shadows don't breathe. Then just as suddenly, the face was gone. I dropped my spoon, spilling macaroni across the table, and bolted to the front door. Still locked. Deadbolt too. I checked the back. Same. Every window. Locked. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the flashlight. I called Mom's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Probably working. Probably fine. I told myself that over and over. I turned every light in the house on and sat in the living room with a cordless phone in my lap, waiting. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, till I heard it faint, soft, deliberate. A scratching sound, coming from the side of the house, not like a tree branch in the wind. This was closer, rhythmic, like someone slowly dragging their fingernails across the siding, back and forth. I held my breath, willing it to stop, praying it wasn't real. But it kept going. And then came the sound of footsteps, soft and slow, circling the house. The footsteps circled once, twice, then stopped. I sat motionless on the living room floor, phone clutched tight in both hands, too scared to even whisper. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel. I waited, hoping maybe whoever it was had gone. Maybe it was over. Then I heard the thud. It came from the side of the house, my bedroom window. I scrambled toward the hallway, moving as quietly as I could, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I crept up, peeked inside. And there he was. A man, halfway up the siding, one knee on the windowsill, both hands pressed against the glass as he tried to slide it open. He wasn't wearing a mask. Just a dirty gray hoodie pulled up over greasy hair and dark jeans streaked with mud. His face was blank, calm, like this was just another Tuesday night. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. My legs locked. Then his eyes snapped to mine. He saw me, and he smiled. It wasn't wide, just a small, twisted grin. Like he was glad I'd noticed him, like the game had officially begun. I ran, back to the living room, slammed the front door lock again, even though it was already bolted. I dialed 911, voice shaking so badly, the operator had to ask me to repeat the address twice. "He's trying to get in," I whispered. "He's climbing through my window." I didn't know how long help would take. I only knew I had to keep him out until then. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line to keep talking, but I barely heard her. I had wedged myself between the couch and the wall phone, trembling in my grip, eyes locked on the hallway that led to my bedroom. Every second stretched like an hour. Then finally, the sound of sirens. Faint at first, then louder, rushing in from the distance like salvation. Red and blue lights washed over the walls as a police cruiser skidded into the driveway. I heard the front gate rattle, boots crunching against gravel, voices shouting commands. A minute later, there was pounding on the door. "Police, it's safe now." "Open up." I crawled to the door, unlatched the bolt with shaking hands, and let them in. 2 officers swept the house, checked every room, every window. My bedroom window was cracked open just an inch, but the man was gone. They found footprints in the dirt below the window and drag marks along the siding. One of the officers crouched, examining the marks with a tight jaw. "You did the right thing calling," he said quietly. This wasn't random. He knew where to go. Knew you'd be alone. That night I stayed at a neighbor's house. I didn't go back inside until Mom got home. After that night, everything changed. My mom took a week off work and immediately had a security system installed. Cameras went up on every corner of the house, motion lights over every window and door. She added extra locks, reinforced the back door, and even bought a big dog from a local shelter, a nervous-looking German Shepherd mix named Max, who thankfully bonded with me instantly. For a while, I wouldn't sleep in my room. I stayed on the couch in the living room with Max curled at my feet, the TV playing soft reruns, just loud enough to cover the creaks of the house settling. The police never caught the man. They said he probably moved on, probably looking for an easy target. But they didn't have answers. No fingerprints, no leads. Just a vague warning to stay alert and call if anything strange happened again. I couldn't shake the feeling he had watched me before that night. That he knew I was always alone. That he had waited for the right moment. Even years later, I still check every window before bed. Still flinch when motion lights flick on unexpectedly. I never leave the kitchen light off. And I never sit with my back to the glass, just in case someone's watching. It wasn't until almost a month later that we got a call from the police department. They wanted to follow up, said some new information had come to light. My mom put them on speaker, her voice, cautious eyes, flicking to me as the officer began explaining. During a routine reprocessing of evidence, they'd finally lifted partial fingerprints from the outside of my bedroom window. They had matched them to a man already in the system, Thomas Ray Carter. He had a long list of priors, trespassing, unlawful entry, stalking. Nothing that ever kept him behind bars long. But here's what chilled us both. He had been arrested once before in our county. 2 years prior. One town over. For breaking into a home while a child was asleep inside. But that wasn't the worst of it. The officer went quiet for a second, then said there was also blood. Apparently, when Carter had tried to force the window open that night, he must have cut his hand on the inner latch. A few drops had landed on the sill, barely visible, soaked into the wood. They'd tested it just to be thorough. It was his. That meant he had been right there, inches away. One more push, one more second, and he would have made it inside. My mom turned pale. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach that never really left. The officer said Carter had disappeared not long after that night. No known address, no job. Nothing. Just vanished. And while they had issued a warrant, no one expected him to turn up unless he tried again somewhere else with someone else. That night, after we got off the phone, I stood in front of the kitchen window for a long time. Max sat at my feet, ears twitching. The backyard was empty, silent, safe. But I still imagined a face watching from the dark. And I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked up when I did. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, Don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.